Hello everybody and welcome to the round glass review for the Pentax-FA 77mm f1.8 Limited. This lens is Pentax branded. It was originally made by Hoya and later was made, is still made by Ricoh. It is known as the 77mm f1.8 Limited, often just called the 77mm Limited among us Pentax enthusiasts. It was produced from 1999 to 2021 for the model in this video, and then it was refreshed in 2021 to update the lens coatings only, not the optical design. The 2021 refresh appears to still be in production. This lens was really designed and best for portraits. For your bottom line up front, this lens really does work best for portraits. That's its space and that's where it wants to be. For portrait photographers, this lens is hard to beat because of the overall image quality, the general lens performance, and the incredibly compact size and low weight, which combine to make it easy to take on a shoot. That said, this lens is so incredibly sharp that it can take photos that are inadvertently unflattering to your subjects, and people who are sensitive about blemishes or their appearance in general may find images taken with this lens to be too honest. The focal length and angle of view are 77mm and 31.4 degrees on full frame, and 116mm and approximately 17.5 degrees on APS-C. The aperture range is 1.8 to 22. The element and group count are 7 and 6. The design type is double gauze. Filter size 49mm. Closest focus 0.7 meters, which for those of us in the US is 1.6 burrito widths. The drive type is autofocus screw drive, but it's pretty easy to use as manual focus as well. The native mount is Pentax-K. The dimensions are 64 by 48mm, and it weighs in at 270 grams. The 77mm focal length is really meant to be a portrait lens, and this lens really shines in the portrait category. That said, my best tip for this lens is not to limit yourself to portraits. Also, this lens works very well across the focal length, not something I say often in this series. Shoot it up close and at infinity, and if your subject and composition are pleasing, this lens will deliver the goods. The final tip I have is that this lens is a bit tight for a lot of uses, such as street photography, expansive landscapes, and interior architecture. That's simply a focal length limitation. That doesn't mean that this lens doesn't have a place in those settings, it just means that it will deliver a different type of photography there, and using this lens in those settings can help you expand your ability to photograph in difficult situations. The limited lenses are always something special and include some amazing engineering and performance. Pentax has a long tradition of these being one of their premier lines, the Star series being the only ones that are arguably better. The Limiteds have a strong following for their compact size, the 21mm being an exception to that, and performance. This lens includes a floating element system designed to help correct field curvature. Within the lens's design specs for focus range, it works. Outside of it, and take note macro photographers, the floating element system cannot keep up with the field curvature introduced by higher magnifications. This lens works beautifully in its intended design range, and there's no need to go crazy testing the boundaries. Breathing across the full focus range is quite pronounced. However, in a more realistic setting with a focus throw of around 0.7 meters starting at the closest focus point, breathing is less noticeable and for many videographers should be a non-issue. The aperture is stepped in full stops on the ring and controllable on camera in third, half, or full stops, depending on your camera settings. The front element moves in and out with focusing, but does not rotate, so video use with a CPL or gradient filters should be relatively predictable. The horizontal movement is 12.5mm, which is approximately 16% of this lens's focal length. Focus throw is approximately 160 degrees, which is a little hard to tell visually because the lens's housing blocks all of the focus info except for what's on top of the lens. The focus ring is stationary and relatively narrow with a beautifully milled grip that could take a clip-on focusing gear fairly easily. Focus damping is, due to this being an autofocus lens, minimal. This lens does not feel like a pleasing manual focus lens. because screw drive autofocus lenses require that the focusing components spin freely to reduce motor strain, and the gearing does transmit a bit of vibration as this lens is focused manually. Focus ring play is non-existent, but there can be a faint whine in manual focus due to the autofocus gearing. The autofocus effects on audio will be significant if you're using on-camera audio, as the autofocus motor and screw drive gears make substantial noise compared to lenses with newer motor types. This is not a lens to use in autofocus with on-camera audio. Sharpness is staggeringly good, to the point that if you use this lens for portraits of people who are self-conscious about their appearance, they will not like the results. You can trust me on this. The lens is so sharp that it is unwaveringly honest about how people look. Build quality is incredible, and now that I've had and used mine for more than a decade, I've carried it in my cargo pockets, backpacks, camera cases, and on many trips. I can attest that it's held up beautifully with no issues in performance or function. Contrast is middle of the pack, which gives the photographer a significant amount of leniency in editing images. Aperture stars are prominent when stopped down, and the 9-bladed aperture creates 18-pointed stars that exhibit a strong set of 9 points and a secondary set of 9 points for a striking and attractive aperture star. Out-of-focus area characteristics depend strongly on the background, and relatively close and busy backgrounds with many specular highlights will create chaotic out-of-focus areas. Backgrounds that are further in the distance or with fewer colors and highlights will yield pleasing background blur. Distortion is almost completely removed, with very mild barrel distortion on the very edges of the vertical peripheries. Light loss is dramatic at f1.8 and f2, almost gone by f4, and effectively gone by f5.6. Flare is almost eliminated by the built-in lens hood, which I strongly recommend using anytime you have this lens out. These two samples were achieved by pushing the lens hood in and getting the sun in the frame. It's ideal to avoid that. For ghosting, in 10 years of photos with this lens, I could find 0 examples that exhibited ghosting, so kudos on that, Pentax engineers. Balance with cameras is excellent with cameras of any size, film or digital, SLR or mirrorless, because this lens is small but dense. Chromatic aberrations are an area where this lens is weak, however. This is especially true in dark areas of a scene where there are bright highlights. Both magenta and green aberrations will occur based on whether the highlight is in front of or behind the focal point, respectively. This issue does largely self-rectify when you stop the lens down. The Pentax 77mm f1.8 FA Limited is a lens that every Pentax user should consider. This lens is one of the marquee lenses in the Pentax portfolio, and the image quality on these holds up well. As of this video's recording, this lens was introduced 24 years ago with a slight update in 2021 to introduce new coatings. Other than the coatings update, the 2021 and later version of this lens is the same as the version used in this video. Not a lot of camera gear reaches the 2-decade mark for production. Even less reaches that mark and then keeps being made with a relatively incremental update. That simple statement ought to tell you all you need to know about the 77mm FA Limited. This lens is so good that no reason exists to provide an improvement. Sometimes people just get things right. A baseball connects well and lands outside the park. A rocket takes off from and then lands again on a ship in the ocean. Or a marbled wagyu ribeye comes off the cast iron with a beautiful crust and a warm pink middle. Sometimes we people do things well. The 77mm Limited is that home run that just broke your windshield. It's that landed rocket ship. And it's that wagyu ribeye served just hot enough to melt foie gras. Pentax has released now 4 full-frame limited lenses. That's 4 amazing reasons to be in the Pentax ecosystem. But if I'm honest, the 77mm alone is really the only reason that you need.
maybe I've gone